Hello, everyone, and welcome to season 3 of Community Living Toronto's Community Chats podcast. Very glad that you've chosen to join in today and stuck with us for the last couple of seasons. We have got a really interesting and dynamic group of guests coming up over the next number of episodes, and I'm sure you'll enjoy them. Today, I have a discussion with Vassy Kapelos, who is one of Canada's premier political journalists. As a host on CTV with a long history in media, Vassy brings a really unparalleled insight into politics and power in Canada. Vassy also has a history with Community Living Toronto that goes back a couple of decades, and we'll get into that during our discussion. We'll also learn about her passion for people, what's kept her interested in the work that she does, and what her interests are today. Vassy has recently joined our Patrons Council, and we're really proud to have her as a supporter of our work. I now bring you our conversation with Vassy Kapelos. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our third season, hard to believe, of Community Chats, a podcast of Community Living Toronto, where we interview and have conversations with people that are connected with our organization, people that have an interest in the disability field, and just interesting people in general that are of interest to our community. Today, I'm really pleased to welcome Vassy Kapelos. Or Kapelos,
There you go. You got it.
I got it. Perfect. Who's recently joined our Patrons Council. And our Patrons Council has been around for about 25 years. And it's made up of people who have an influence and have some interest in the work that we do and really help us in our mission and in the fields where they've excelled in. So Vassy has joined us recently, and really pleased to welcome you for our first episode this year. Vassy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Brad. I'm thrilled to be with you. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. Now you are a Toronto person who grew up in Toronto, and now you're a well-known broadcaster nationally. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself for people that don't know, or maybe fill in some of the blanks for people that do know you.
Sure. So I'll try to be brief because I don't know if this is that exciting, but I did grow up in Toronto. I'm Greek, so I'm half Greek, half German, but the Greek side was very dominant, and so we grew up right off the Danforth in the same house that my dad still lives in today. I have two younger sisters. All three of us grew up there. We had a wonderful childhood. I feel a great affinity for Toronto, although I spent a number of years working in other parts of the country and downplayed the fact that I was from Toronto. I feel like less encumbered by that now. I think I can publicly say that I did grow up there and I still love it. My whole family still lives there. And essentially, I eventually went to university, did a master's, and throughout that process, determined that I kind of wanted to give it a go in TV journalism, and was able, after my master's, to find like a post grad program that taught you how to be on TV, how to talk, how to write, how to shoot, edit, all of that kind of stuff. And then turned that, just a few weeks after leaving that program, into my first job in Swift Current, Saskatchewan. So I went from living in Toronto to a town of 15,000 people in Southwest Saskatchewan. I had never been to Saskatchewan before. And then from there, made my way to Saskatoon eventually. And this is a years long process, from
Yeah.
Saskatoon to Edmonton, and then ultimately to Ottawa. When I had started working as a journalist, I knew from the very moment I started, all I wanted to do exclusively was cover politics. And I often had a dream, like I wanted to be like Tim Russert. That was who hosted the Sunday show for the Americans for
Face the
so many
nation. Yeah.
years. Yeah, Meet the Press, close to say
Meet the
the other
press.
one,
What am
but
I?
same thing. It's all
Sorry.
good.
Yes.
It's the same vibe. He just had like he was sort of like, I love that show. I grew up watching it. I love the Canadian version in Question Period, which I'm lucky enough to
Yeah.
host now. And so I had that, like, it sounds weird to say, but I had that very clear objective from the start. And so I made my way back to Ottawa. And in this whole time, I was working as a reporter. And I did that. I reported for another 5 years in Ottawa. Then I moved to being a host of the political show on CBC, and then now host of the political shows on CTV. And so I basically am lucky enough to do exactly what I had hoped I always would be.
That's fantastic. What a journey to sort of work through. And that sort of path from starting out from the idea and starting out in Swift Current up to Ottawa, that took 10, 15 years. Is that the kind of time
So
span that
that
you?
was, to get all the way to Ottawa took about let me think about this for a second. 5 years. So I've been in Ottawa since
Okay.
the end of 2013. 6 years.
Okay.
6 years. So I started in 2007. I moved out Halloween, I believe it was, of 2007 to Swift Current, and by the end of 2013, I was in Ottawa.
So I should confess, I'm a fan of yours, and I watched you on the CBC program and followed you as you moved over to CBC. And I didn't know this, but the fact that you have a master's degree these days, I love that because so much information that we get these days is not thoughtful or not informed. And I love that that's part of what you did. You took that education and applied it to the really important field of understanding our politics and how it works. So that's fantastic to hear. Now you do the afternoon show on CTV, and then you've got a couple of other shows that you're doing there as well. Do you want to talk about them?
Yeah, so I do the TV show at 5, and then I do a Sunday show that airs at 11 Eastern on the main network. And then I
Hmm.
also host a radio show every day, Monday to Thursday from 12 to 2 Eastern, that airs across the iHeartRadio Talk Network, like it's syndicated across the country. For people in Toronto, that's on 1010.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so that airs every day there. And that's not just politics, it's like a mix of a million different things. Today is a great example of that. We covered a million different things, but it's basically like a national radio show.
Okay, fantastic. Now, the connection with Community Living Toronto, I didn't know this until I was talking to somebody. Our Patrons Council is an important part of what we do, and we've connected with some really great people who've been quite supportive. And we were talking about who could join, and somebody in at Community Living who just retired, Margarita, mentioned, "Well, I know Vashi. Maybe she's interested." And I had no idea about your connection and background with our organization. Tell us a little bit about that. It's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I certainly come by it honestly. I was friends with her son in university, and and she was so passionate about
Yeah.
what she did with you guys that that had certainly translated to him. And in turn, essentially, I ended up hearing a lot about it. And I can't remember the exact genesis, but at the time, I was a competitive rower, and in I had just started my own business in the summer, running a summer camp for teenagers out of the Argonaut Rowing Club, sort of right on the harbor. And I guess somehow it had, I don't know, I really don't remember the genesis, but
Yeah.
basically I had decided that I wanted to, in the months prior to the summer, start a program for kids who wouldn't normally, or people who wouldn't normally have access to rowing, because it had really changed my life in such a positive way,
Hmm.
to have access to it and to learn how to row. It's a really, it can be a very inexpensive sport. It's not like hockey where you've kind of got to be of a certain social
Yeah.
status in order to be able to bring your kids there and afford all the equipment and everything. You basically, just need a boat that's supplied by somewhere, and that's it. There's no equipment associated and that kind of thing. And so somehow we came up with this idea to combine schools in areas that face a lot of socioeconomic challenges. So kids from those schools in high school with kids and young adults from community living,
Hmm.
and they were all together in the boats. And I recruited some of my friends who I rode with or others at the club to volunteer and help this. And I have to say, the club at the time was like so wonderful about just like, this is great, let's do it. Everybody was sort of on board with making it happen. I don't know if things would be as simple at this day and age, but at that time, the school boards, the schools, everybody was on board, and we arranged sort of like how people could get there and all this stuff. And then we would do, I think it was like a month-long program, 2 nights a week.
Okay.
And I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays, if I remember. And then it
Hmm.
concluded with a regatta where we had like a big barbecue and a big party, and they would race each other. The boats would race each other. And it was just, I think we did it for at least 2 or 3 years. Like, it was a
Yeah,
real
that's what I
highlight.
understand. Yeah.
My sisters became involved. Like I said, our friends, like anybody, people just like the second they got a taste of it, and even came for one and saw the like level of enthusiasm and the level of, I would say, like, everyone got along so well. And it was such a great example of not, keeping certain groups of people because of X, Y, or Z. And I'm talking about both
Yeah.
money and disabilities, away from each other, or excluding them, or keeping things separate. Everything worked perfect. We never had a single issue in all of those years of kids fighting or this or that or giving anyone a hard time. Like, it was honestly seamless. And so I had great affection for that program. It was one of the highlights of my whole life. And when I moved to Ottawa, I
Right.
also ended up volunteering with community living here because I had had such a positive experience, and I have become lifelong friends with the family that I ended up volunteering with in sort of like a skills program where I would bake with the girl I was sort of assigned to or whatever, and on a biweekly basis or something. And now our families have become very close friends.
That's fantastic. We did when this came up, and it came up in sort of a group setting. We were talking about people at there remembered that rowing club
Yeah.
from a number of years ago, and it was something that people loved, enjoyed themselves. Getting, I grew up in Toronto as well, in Rexdale, and you forget what a bonus, what a gem we have at the lake. And when you're down by the
Oh
lake, it
yeah.
just seems like the city washes away, and you're there in
Different
the
world.
water, and working out with some friends, and spending some time in the sun and in the summer. That's great. We found some pictures of you that I don't know if we have the technology to insert these, but we'll show some pictures of you and your sister, I gather, was in one of the
Yeah.
boats that we've got a picture of. So
Yeah.
that's
Both my
fantastic.
sisters became a part of it. My mom, who's since passed, was a part of it. Like everyone who could help helped in some way, whether it was putting together that barbecue or making sure there were snacks all the time, or rides were a big thing, getting all the kids there and getting them home and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. So yeah.
yeah. Great. The when you were training for Castle, I used to know someone that did rowing at U of T, and one of their challenges training routines was running up the steps at Casa Loma. Was that something you had to do, or
No, no,
okay?
no.
She hated that.
Like
She hated
I
that,
can't,
but
yeah, I came by none of it naturally. Like, you know how most competitive athletes are, there's something in them genetically, or they're predisposed in some way, like their parents or something, and they're just like meant to do that. I was never meant to do it. My mom, I watched Marty McBean in the Olympics, and I was
okay.
like, this looks cool. I was like in high school having a rough time like any other kid, and my mom's like, why don't you try this thing? They have a learn to row program. And I did it, and immediately, physical activity can help you with any kind of mental issues that you face, insofar as it's like it's a distraction, there's some sort of release that happens, and I definitely, that applied to me in that instance. And so I was drawn to the sport not because I thought I would become a competitive athlete or anything, just because of that experience and sort of what it did for my life. And then just as I became more enamored with it, as you gain more skills, like it makes sense to try and compete. So I did a lot of other things, but like on the rowing machine, we did tons of stuff to train. But
Right.
ultimately, I was never the best of the best. I was never like meant to go on to great things or anything like that. But I took it as far as I could, let's just say.
Good, good. I can relate to that. Not an athlete, but knew lots of people that were, and wished I was better at stuff. But
Yeah,
you make the best with what you're given.
that's
So
right.
in your role currently, and as your time growing up, one of the things that reporters really work on is holding people to account, particularly people in power. And you're in a unique position now to do that on behalf of Canadians, that you sort of become our voice around finding out what's going on. And I know you recently did an interview. I think you can correct me, but you were one of the first interviews with Prime Minister Carney.
I was the first Canadian
The
interview.
first.
Yeah.
Yeah, how
We
was
were,
that?
yeah.
How was that?
It was great. I prepared an enormous amount for it. I was very nervous. I studied for 2 days straight, basically. I put a lot of effort into sort of designing what I hoped would be the line of conversation. And I will say, like, this is not a partisan comment at all, and not meant, in any way, in any direction or form, but like it
Yeah.
is a nice feeling to be nervous. It's a nice feeling to feel like you need to be your most prepared. And I appreciate that in every political party. And it's not every politician that you feel that for. And so that was certainly one of those. And I was very proud of our team for securing that interview as well.
Yeah, excellent. You mentioned being nervous, and you did a series of Ask Me Anything sort of things. You're a very prolific social media poster. It's fun to watch. You talked about being nervous a lot about
Yeah.
what you're doing. A lot of times, people that we support with a disability, whether it's going into a job or going out in the community, and there's a vulnerability, are influencers, which is our sort of a group of people with disabilities that advocate just did a video that they've put out on Instagram and TikTok on the use of the R word and how many of them have been on the receiving end of that and how challenging and how that affected them, right? So there's a nervousness that comes.
I can only
And
imagine.
drawing a thin line here, but the nervousness that you feel preparing for an interview or going on TV, and what people can feel just living their lives. Any tips you've got for people around dealing with that kind of nervousness,
Well, it's
or
a
being
great
afraid of stuff?
question.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm afraid of a lot of things. First, I think it's like important for people whose whole job is to project the opposite, to admit what the truth is, right? Like, I'm not here to
right,
pretend that I'm someone I'm not. And everybody in different circumstances can feel nervous or can feel afraid of things. My plight is certainly not comparable to what somebody who in a situation like you just described would
yeah,
feel. And
yeah,
like, it makes me like sick to my stomach to even think
for
about
sure,
that. The only piece of advice I would have is to sort of like, I don't know how to say this, but maybe, embrace the nerves. Like, accept
right,
that that is a part of life. Might not be justified, probably isn't justified, certainly is not
right,
in the example that you provided. But if you if you accept things that you don't love as just like a part of your life, it's sometimes easier to overcome them. Like, in my example, there was a time in my life where I was like, is this how I'm going to feel all the time? Like, can I live my whole life feeling sick to my stomach all the time? Like, when is this feeling? Like, it's very demanding. You have to have guests, you have to have stories. You have, like, there's no day that's just like I remember I used to walk by like Starbucks and be like, I just wish I was like pouring coffee today, and then I could go home at 5. And
yeah,
I can't imagine how a surgeon feels or whatever.
yeah,
And so I sort of like eventually got to a point where I was like, I can just accept. I found ways to mitigate it. But I generally accept that that is a feeling that I'm going to have. And it sounds weird. Once I was like, okay, like, I'm going to have to deal with some crappy stuff,
right,
then it became easier to deal with said stuff. And so, like, even if, in my view, even if it's like disgusting and totally wrong that they have to like feel those nerves,
yeah,
if you sort of say to yourself, like, I'm going to feel them,
yeah.
it's going to happen. You might just have to deal with responding rather than the emotion attached to, like, being in that moment, if that makes sense. Anything that helps
It
remove
does.
emotion from things helps you deal with them,
Yeah.
in
And I
my
think
view.
it's helpful for people like yourself and others who, you would look at when you see you on TV or see others in positions, whether it's athletes or whatever performing, to say that, yeah, I feel sick to my stomach almost every
Oh yeah,
day around the work I have to do. Because I think we would project onto you that you don't feel that you've mastered it, everything's
100%.
cool. And we just all have to own the fact that life can be that way. And we feel that that's part of the human condition is feeling uncomfortable, feeling nervous, feeling scared about stuff. Own it and move forward.
Yeah, all the time. We
Yeah.
have, like, it's true. I'm scared all the time.
Okay. Um, so we started to talk a little bit about accountability. And again, you're in a platform where you hold people in power to account through questions and back and forth and knowing what issues are. Um, in the disability community, there's been a couple of issues that have come up lately, and I'd appreciate your thoughts on them. So one is the Canada Disability Allowance, CDBA, which has been developed over a number of years, and there was a panel that was put together to advise government on how to do it, and it rolled out a while ago around a monthly allowance that looks like it's going to be about $200 and that. The other one is medical assistance in dying, and a field where our national organization Inclusion Canada is very worried. And actually, another member of our Patrons Council, Brendan Purin, and I did a podcast on sort of the risks that are run around a too open a runway for medical assistance in dying to happen. Did you have any thoughts? I know you've done some work on this on your show around the CDBA, and I don't know if you've done anything on MAID, but any thoughts or advice that you've got for us as a community around how do we keep these issues top of mind and what we can do around it, holding people accountable?
Well, I guess I don't necessarily have advice, but I have sort of my own experience that I can impart. Like, I think the onus is on people like me. I think that people who are affected by a lot of this stuff already carry a huge burden.
Right.
And those of us who are in positions to be able to question the people making these decisions really, and it's not necessarily second nature, but we have to be cognizant of the people who don't generally have as much of a voice, and make sure that we internalize that in our decision making at different times, when yes, every day Trump is the top of the news cycle, but like there are other things going on that affect people in a massive way, that who can't necessarily, or who don't necessarily have the platform to at least ask questions, right? And so
Right.
even a part of the reason I jumped at this opportunity was because maybe since my original experience with community living, I have felt a big attachment to that, in this area specifically. um I So in like like what you mentioned, for example, on the maid side, there's a lot of nuance, right? And it's
For
not like
sure.
you can brandish like necessarily every person with a disability saying the same thing, or there's a
Right.
lot of, as I said,
There
there's a lot
is.
of
There
nuance.
is.
So I've tried to cover the nuance, and that by that I mean present a number of different views, and I've done
For
that a
sure.
lot on radio in particular. The disability benefit to me is a huge story, and I'll tell you why. So um, look, I think a lot of people are worried about, and have been worried about, the way in which their tax dollars are spent. I think it's a big
Hmm.
part of what I do, right? To ensure that there are questions about whether the hard-earned money that we make, is being used effectively. And in this case, what really struck a note for me was, I have this belief that I have no issue with paying taxes, as long as they're helping the people that need it the most. If I'm paying a ton of tax, it should be that there isn't a 17-hour wait at the children's hospital ER.
Yeah.
There's,
Yeah.
like basic things that I think amount to a lot of frustration with Canadians, who are like, why is it like this when we are handing over so much money? And that there's complicated and complex answers to that. But for me, one of the basic things is like, people who through no choice of their own are living with a disability should not have to beg to live above the poverty line. I think that's like a fundamental human ethical thing that like
Yeah.
really strikes with me. And that's not a partisan thing. That's like, if you have worked with people like that, or met them, or they're in your family, you can only imagine how much their parents worry about their future. You can only imagine how scared people around them are about, what they're going to be able to do and survive and live. And like,
Yeah.
if there's a role for government in society, like, isn't that one of them? So put that as that's a fundamental sort of thing that occupies my head a lot. Put that
Hmm.
aside for a second. I understand there are financial constraints. I understand that governments have to do so many different things. But the thing that really got me on this benefit in particular was the promise that the government made on a number of different instances through a couple of different election cycles, to
Yeah.
lift people out of poverty. It's a very noble promise. It's a very valuable promise, and it meant a lot to
It
people who
did.
would be affected by it.
It
They
did.
took it to heart. This wasn't just like the, other promises that people roll their eyes at, that, oh, they're going to do this. Okay, whatever. It's just politics. Like, people believe them. And unfortunately, what was delivered, though there are, good aspects of it, it comes short. It falls short of what was promised. I think that's objectively true to say. And so I had a huge interest in questioning the government over it.
It it
I did.
it does not. It does not lift people out of poverty.
It does
Certainly,
not.
and I know the Ontario context best around ODSP, and what $200 a month means in addition to that, and it does not lift you out of poverty.
It does not. And again, that's objectively, right? And so I saw a very real line of accountability to the government. And I felt a responsibility to be, and not to be cheesy about it, but like, there weren't a lot of questions being asked, and we're overwhelmed. There's not many of us journalists left. Like, there's so many
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
things to ask about, but I'm very lucky I have a platform. And I put that minister on my Sunday show, which has the biggest audience of all the show. Like, it's a big network show.
Yeah.
And um I asked those questions, like, I just really felt it was important to point out to Canadians how much this fell short for people, because the hope is, look, it's not about humiliating anyone, or it's the hope is that ultimately they come to their senses and realize how deficient this is. And over time, which the regulations do allow for,
Yeah.
they boost it, right? So in order to meet the promise that they originally made, like that opportunity still exists. So the government should be on high alert that there are people watching and keeping them to account throughout that process, should that be where it goes. Like I believe very firmly in that, and I thought it was really important to cover.
Yeah, well, thanks for that because you know that really resonated with people we support, and we appreciate that because that's the work, right? I tend to view these things as well. It landed, it's not enough, but it can grow over time as long as we keep up pressure and keep that benchmark of just because you have a disability and you're receiving a government disability benefit, you shouldn't be relegated to poverty. And I'll give, and in that vein, I'll give. The Ford government in Ontario kudos, although ODSP is about 50% of the rate of poverty, they had 2 or 3 years ago tied it to the rate of inflation. So the benefit would increase over time. And it's gone up 10, 15% in the last few years, which is great because for decades it was just a stagnant number. So progress comes, but it comes slowly.
Yeah, it does. And I appreciate like yeah, that I appreciate that. I guess for me as I push for the most. Like I'm
Thank you.
like that, you know, my job is to
Yeah,
do is and it's not simply like again just like for the sake of it. I very carefully looked at exactly what they promise. And I think the same can be said of provincial governments. Like what have
yeah,
you promised these communities and what are you delivering? And it's my job to go hard after the gap.
great, fantastic. Um, so we, y- y- I would love for you to ask me a couple of questions because I've never been interviewed by a professional journalist before, such as yourself. So, in anything as you've gotten to know community living, it's been a while since you've been more involved. I know you've gotten involved and understand a little bit more in the last couple of months. But any questions for me?
Why do you do your job?
Why do I do my job? Um, this is a pretty easy one. So I love what I do. And I started out in high school working at a camp where it was a camp for deaf kids and adults. And the 2 weeks at the end of the summer was called special camp. And this is in the 80s. So that was the terminology of the day. But we had people come from Huronia Regional Center who on a bus, and Huronia Regional Center is one of the provincial institutions that closed in 2009, and it was just where people with disabilities lived. And that was my introduction to this community, this group of people, and it just seemed to matter where you're dealing with people in their lives, and you're a part of that, and you can see progress and change. So as I've watched my friends and that go pursue different career paths and that, and it's all good. I'm not one to sort of say to judge anything, but trying to figure out ways for more people to buy more your type of deodorant or or fly on your airline or whatever. It just didn't seem quite as meaningful as being involved in helping to develop. And I'm in a great position now where I can help develop housing and look for employment supports and provide supports to families that might need a break. It's challenging work because the environment we work in is sometimes restrictive and regulated, and there's never enough money. But at the end of the day, it's meaningful and rewarding, and that keeps me going.
You mentioned the challenges, like what's the hardest part of the job?
The hardest part of the job is again when you're dealing with people, you're dealing with the best of times and sort of the worst of times. So when things don't go well or people have significant challenges that sort of hit close to home, those are the difficult times. We had a woman. That we supported for years, who passed away suddenly. We were talking about this earlier, and her name was Kelly. And she moved into a housing apartment that we had built, and she'd can't come in from a really lousy apartment in not a great neighborhood, and she struggled with sort of feeling unwanted. And for years, she took picture of this building as it was growing and would post it on Facebook. And I was friends with her on, I am friends was friends with her on Facebook, and I would see that. It would sort of keep you going as you're going to all these meetings. So that's the challenging part around the people. And when she passed away, it was great to see her, like, get to know her over the last couple of years, but you just feel sad on what she didn't get to experience in the coming years. That's the human side of it. The other piece is just dealing with so much of what we do depends on government money, and it never seems like it's the right time for our community. So when
Mm,
times are good, well, we'll get there. When times are bad, which it feels like we're going into that, where
it's a great
there's
point.
never any money, but all of a sudden we can spend 2 and 3 times as much as we do on the military. But there's never the time when disability is like, okay, this is when we're going to focus on disability. So though that's the challenging piece as well, to work in an environment where it's always under, it's never there's never you're never sort of getting everything that you need.
I get that. Do you want
Yeah.
another question? All right.
If you've got one, or but
Right. So just a very quick one. Like, what is like if community living in 5 years is the most successful you could imagine it would be, what's the headline?
yeah, that's a great question. I, I would say it has as I'm not a great headline writer, but the future looks bright for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That so much of what we do, parents in their, my daughter's in university, my son's just finished high school, and so many parents in those situations don't know what the future holds. Like, my daughter's in university. I have a clear path. She's going to probably graduate at some point in the next couple of years and pursue a career. I don't think people with intellectual disabilities and their parents have that clear path, or have that path clear enough for them. So there's a lot of unknowns. I feel for parents as they get older
Yeah.
and they have sons or daughters living at home, and they're, building a life for themselves. But that path around what happens next is not clear. So again, I'd love that to see. The future looks bright
Future is bright.
for people with disabilities.
I hope I get to write that headline.
That would be great. That would be
Yeah.
great. So one of the things we like to end our interviews with is asking people what belonging means to you. And I should say one of the things that we didn't get to talk too much about was sort of, because you talk about in one of your AMAs that you just did, you talked about an incident that happened where you had well, I'll let you talk about it, but around what the world the current state is and what it should be. Anyway, that's not a great way of asking a question. I'm rambling on, but what does belonging mean to you? And do you have an example of what you think the future might look like yeah, with that sense of belonging?
Right. Well, I'll tie the two together really quickly. So the question I had gotten was, does the state of the world kind of get you down? Like, do you ever just find
Yeah.
it too much? And my, instant and instinctual answer is no. And the reason is because I cover that, but I live in my community and in the moment. And I feel like two things can be true at the same time. There's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world that we should know about, because a problem cannot be solved unless we're aware of it. So people who are like, I don't watch the news, I don't care about politics, I don't buy it, I don't appreciate. No, sorry, you should. It's your job as a human to help better the world. And the only way you can do that is if you can identify what's wrong with it. At the same time, I am sympathetic to someone who turns on the news right now and goes, "Oh my God, I just can't get through this. Like, this is just too hard." And my answer, like my own way out of that, is to look for good stuff that is going on, because there is so much of it at the granular level, like at the
Yeah.
individual level. My example was I got in an accident a few weeks ago. I rear-ended a guy, and he got out of the car, and he was the nicest person I've ever met in my life. Like, his concern was only for me, even though I had run into him. And I said to my husband later that night, like it like dawned on me the degree to which you can choose to be kind. Like, how stress in our lives turns us into these sort of like monsters at times, or like we use
Yeah.
it internally to justify out of proportion reactions, or like just being not the nicest person because it's like, "Ah, my life is so hectic, it's so crazy, everything got." And this guy's in an accident on a busy road, pulled over, and was just like immensely kind, to a point where I felt comforted. Like, he literally waited till I got back in the road before he even got back into his own car. And I use that example because I think we have 1.5 million of those every day around us. And to me, that helps buffer sort of any of that sentiment that's out there about being overwhelmed about what is going on. And I think, well, that feeds very much into belonging, because when you feel that sense of belonging, and I use the word community kind of loosely, but it could apply
Yeah.
to your home, your neighborhood, your class, your country, right? A whole bunch of those things. When you feel that sense, you feel more indomitable. You
Right.
feel like you can take on the harder stuff in life. And so it is a necessity of a good life to have belonging, in my view, to feel like you belong somewhere. And I believe it is a necessity of all of us to be that kind guy,
Yeah.
so that everyone feels that sense of belonging. Like the responsibility just doesn't just lie on the person who hopes to belong. It lies on all of us to create a society in which people feel that belonging.
Yeah.
And I am guilty of not always doing that or remembering that, and using the stress of the macro, the stress of the world, whatever it is, my job, to justify like not doing enough to make sure people are included and feel like they belong.
Right.
And so I view it as like a central part of getting through life with resilience.
There, we're in the age of rage. It feels like that's what's rewarded, and this a great sentiment
Yeah.
around moving to getting back to or towards this sort of the age of kindness, and where we're all sort of feel like we're in this together. Great,
And we
great,
have
great
freedom of
answer.
choice. We have freedom of
We
choice.
do. We have
I have to
agency
keep
over this.
reminding myself of that, right? Like I'm not
Yeah.
a social media bot. I can make my own choices. Yeah.
Yeah. Vashi, thank you. You've been
My
generous with
pleasure.
your time. You're a busy person. Thank you for this discussion, and thanks for joining our Patrons Council. Really look forward to having you as part of that group and working together with you.
Well, thanks for the invitation to both. I'm honored to be a part of the council. I can't wait to do more with all of you, and I appreciate the talk today.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, watching, and sharing. We release a new episode of Community Chats on the 15th and 30th of each month, so don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date.